India's biggest weakness today isn't poverty. It isn't unemployment. It's the collapse of civic sense. It's no secret. Watch these. People spit on streets, throw garbage beside dustbins, and treat public property as if it were their private estate. Rivers choke with sewage. Metro stations turn into open toilets. And yet, some citizens demand a clean Yamuna and Ganga. But here's the twist. What if I told you Singapore once looked worse than this? Yes, Singapore. Today one of the cleanest and richest nations on earth was once dismissed as nothing more than a giant slum. In the 1950s and 60s, addiction and crime were everyday realities. People openly defecated on the streets, spat wherever they liked, and gambling syndicates ruled entire neighborhoods. Half the population lived in slums. During World War II, the Japanese occupation turned the island into a nightmare. Crimes against women broke society apart. When the British returned in 1945, they found a colony devastated by poverty, disease, and unemployment. By the early 1960s, Singapore was so desperate, it joined Malaysia.
Sudah 100 lebih tahun Singapura menjadi satu pusat perniagaan dalam Asia Tenggara. Dan 1,600,000 lebih orang di Singapura adalah kebolehan, keusahaan yang boleh menolong negeri kita menjadi satu negeri yang lebih.
But discrimination and rights tore them apart. On the 9th August 1965, Singapore declared independence. Alone, poor, with no natural resources, and with corruption embedded from top to bottom.
Would you mind if we stop for a while? They are out, but we will still do it. And I asked the Malays, don't worry. This was the government that believed in multiracialism, had brought Singapore away from chauvinism into multiracialism. Pity, it turned out that we could not achieve multiracialism and integration in Malaysia.
Few believed survival was possible. But then came Lee Kuan Yew. Lee understood one truth. Survival demanded discipline. First, he launched a housing revolution. Through the Housing Development Board, slums were emptied into modern high-rise flats. Today, over 80% of Singaporeans live in HDB apartments. Second, he launched a war on dirt. Keep Singapore Clean began in 1968. Spitting and littering carried heavy fines. Chewing gum was banned. Public toilets were modernized and strictly maintained. Children were taught hygiene and civic duty from their earliest years. And something remarkable happened. As the streets got cleaner, so did the minds and behavior of people. Happiness rose. Crimes and substance abuse reduced. Crimes against women and children declined. This is the psychology of cleanliness. When a nation cleans its environment, it also cleans its behavior. I've explained the science of uncivilized behavior in detail. Links are in the description. But did Lee stop there? Of course not. Every lane and street was beautified, footpaths were built, encroachments removed, roads clearly marked. This physical order brought civic sense into people's minds. Citizens became more responsible, more disciplined. Still, Lee did not stop. The third step was industrialization at lightning speed. Jurong Industrial Estate became a hub of electronics and pharmaceuticals. World-class ports and airports connected Singapore to global trade. Foreign investment poured in, jobs multiplied, and poverty began to disappear. Fourth, education. Schooling became compulsory. World-class public schools and vocational institutes were built. Within 2 decades, literacy touched 97%. Finally, the most radical move, a war against corruption. Lee created the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, with extraordinary powers to arrest without warrant, raid homes, seize accounts, and even investigate families of officials. The burden of proof was reversed. If an official owned unexplained wealth, they had to prove it wasn't corruption. And to remove temptation, ministerial salaries were raised to match the private sector. By the 1980s, Singapore's leaders were among the highest paid in the world. Result: corruption collapsed. Even senior ministers were jailed when caught. Within 25 years, Singapore was unrecognizable. Slums vanished, GDP per capita soared, and the world now called it a model nation. But here's the irony. India doesn't need to become Singapore. Once India was cleaner and more civic-minded than Singapore ever dreamed of. The Atharvaved instructed, keep your roads clean. The Garud Puran declared, the top 3 commanders in poverty's army are filth of mind, the body, and the neighborhood. Greek traveller Megasthenes described Pataliputra as a city of order and hygiene. Chinese monk Faxian, during the Gupta Empire, wrote that streets were swept daily. Al-Burini praised the temple cleanliness in the 11th century. European travelers admired Vijayanagara's organized markets in the 16th century. Cleanliness was once our culture, until centuries of invasion, colonial exploitation, and poverty broke it down. Where invasions were weaker, discipline survived. In Meghalaya's Moling-Nong, often called Asia's cleanest village, every family treats cleanliness as a community duty, not a government burden. So why does modern India struggle? Because 3 chains still bind us: corruption, outdated systems, and lack of civic sense. Governments announce cleanliness campaigns, but without citizen participation, they remain slogans. Citizens demand change, but without enforcement, change collapses. Now look at Indore. Once as dirty as any other city, today it is India's cleanest. Door-to-door waste collection, recycling systems, better pay for sanitation workers, and strict rules changed both infrastructure and public attitude. In Indore today, littering is a matter of social shame. People shame you immediately if you spit or throw garbage. And that is how revolutions begin, when citizens and government align. Singapore's story proves something simple. A nation doesn't need resources to rise. It needs discipline, bold leadership, and citizens willing to change. India once had this culture. This is our history. Cleanliness and discipline run through our veins. All we need to do is reclaim it. But only if civic sense is seen not as a government's job, but as a national duty. Our duty as individuals. If Singapore could transform from a slum colony into a first world state in 30 years, why can't India? A civilization that once taught the world about hygiene and civic duty do the same even faster. The answer lies not in Delhi, not in state capitals. It lies in every street, every family, every citizen. So the question is, will India wait for the government, or will we ourselves decide that enough is enough from this very second?